Amen. I want to welcome everybody to this afternoon's question and answer session on courtship and marriage. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we begin. For the following 3 Sabbaths, give you the dates. That's the 12th, the 19th and the 26th of September, which is the next 3 Sabbaths. I won't be doing a question and answer, and the reason for that is that the next 3 weekends I'm actually going to be participating in some Zoom camp meetings. I don't know if they've been advertised or not. I don't know if they will be advertised or not, but for the next 3 weekends I'll be doing some Zoom camp meetings. The first one is targeted at Africa. The second one is second weekend, which is the 19th, is targeted at Oceania, and the last one is targeted at the Americas. So it's Africa, Oceania and America, if we can just think of those 3 continents. I know in each continent there are various time zones, I appreciate that, but just to let you know that for the next 3 weekends we won't be doing these Q&As. So then that will bring us into October, and I guess by the end of September we'll make a decision if we're going to carry on with these questions or we move on. I haven't made that decision yet. I'll see what the feedback is. I know that some people are tiring of the Q&As on courtship, and others are finding them a continued blessing. So we haven't made a decision on what to do yet, but I will let you know. Just another point of interest for those of you who are interested. This morning, that's this morning UK time, we had a Sabbath School presentation that was done via Zoom. It was recorded, and the subject that we addressed was methodology. So we had a 1-hour presentation on methodology, and that was done this morning. If you're interested in watching that, it will get uploaded sometime in the future, sometime in the near future. And for those of you who are interested, that was actually a bilingual translation. So for those of you who didn't listen to the presentations, if you do watch it, we'd appreciate your feedback to see how well that worked for you, if it was okay. So pretty much done with the housekeeping now, and we'll begin with our study. So my first question is the following. There's a couple, they're obviously married, and one of the spouses seems to have given up the faith. They haven't left the movement, but they have stopped studying. Both of them are priests. Both have been baptized. And there's some issue between them that they've got to a place where they cannot discuss one another, and they cannot understand one another, and they cannot any longer discuss doctrinal issues. You may be surprised, but this is I don't want to say a frequent problem, but it's not uncommon. There are a number of people that I know personally in the movement, spouses that are in this situation, that for some reason one of the spouses has basically mentally, emotionally disconnected themselves from the movement. They're still in the movement, they haven't left, but they are no longer studying anymore. They often will say that they've lost interest, or they cannot understand. They'll give some kind of reason or pretext for it, but essentially they're no longer participating in the activities of the movement. Besides this, everything else is fine, which often is not as true as some people make it appear to be. They say everything's fine besides this, but it often is not. Everything is not fine, even though the questioner says that it is. They're living with each other, they have no desire to separate, but they're not in harmony anymore about the message. And what advice can we give to such a couple? So I'm not sure if the questioner is the one who is studying or the one who is not studying. I'm assuming it's the one that's studying, the one who we would normally think is remained faithful, strong in the message, and now they're asking what advice can be given. So this is an age-old problem, not only that confronts this movement, that's confronted God's people right from its very inception. What happens when a couple are together, they are one in the faith, and then one of them decides to basically either not leave the faith directly, but essentially leaves the faith because they have lost their faith or their belief in what's being taught. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's much that can really be done for them unless they are willing to talk, unless they're willing to express why they have this concern, why they have reached the position that they're no longer willing or prepared to study or to communicate with their spouse. There's very little that can be done. The worry that I have for many of us in the movement, I've expressed it this way. In the past, when people were not happy with this movement, they would tend to leave. Today, I have the fear that many brethren and sisters have left the movement mentally, but they haven't left bodily. It's a bit of an unusual situation because we've not really had this kind of behavior in the past, at least in this way, at least from my recollection. So it seems to me that this person has left the movement, but they, for whatever reason, are not prepared to actually be open about that and leave bodily. They've just left mentally. Besides praying, besides trying to encourage the person, I think if we can get friends or elders involved, someone who may be able to have an influence on this person, I don't think there's actually much that can be done for the person, to be honest, except to, as I said, just try to give them time and space to minister to them and hope that they can be won back. But I think the most important thing is to try to understand what has gone wrong in that person's experience, why they have no longer engaged in proper participation in this movement. Somewhere along the line in their experience, something has gone wrong. We do know that one of the big issues that confronts us at the moment is this, what Elder Tess called in a recent presentation, false freedom, which was presented on the 19th of August. This idea of false freedom is something that has really taken hold of this movement in a way that has surprised people and is causing a lot of problems, much more than we might really think. I would recommend that everybody watch that presentation if you have not watched it. It's a 2-part series. It was done on the 19th of August, and it's a really important study. It's one of the landmark studies that has been done in this dispensation. That's the importance that I would place upon that study if someone were to ask me. Next question. This is a similar question. How does one work on their relationship when the other partner doesn't want to communicate or make the friendship or marriage work? There's no infidelity involved. People often put that clause in at the end when addressing issues like this. They'll say ... things are bad, but there's no infidelity involved. And they use that statement, I think, often to indicate that things are not serious. I would argue that physical infidelity or a complete breakdown in the relationship, such as is being portrayed here, that the person doesn't want to communicate or have a friendship to make the marriage work, to weigh up the two to ask which one is worse, I don't think it's that straightforward. To basically shut down in your marriage so that you have no mind-to-mind relationship is as bad, in some ways is worse than actual adultery or infidelity. Because at least with infidelity, most of us can put a grasp upon that. We can wrap our minds around how infidelity works. We can contain it. But this lack of minds meeting, where people, a couple, two spouses, are not able to communicate, and they don't have any desire to communicate and make the marriage work, I think that kind of relationship is more dangerous in many ways than the problem of infidelity. Because infidelity, being a physical act, is immeasurable. It has a better feel to it. It's a common problem that happens even in the medical system. I'm sure most of us, if you're particularly in one of I think it happens in most countries, developed or underdeveloped countries, is that mental health problems are not treated in the same way that physical problems are. There seems to be something with society that causes a stigma to occur when someone has a mental condition as opposed to a physical one. If someone had broken their leg, people would be sympathetic. Or if you had diabetes, or you had something wrong with your liver, something that you could identify, people are sympathetic. But when it comes to a mental health condition, often people are unsympathetic. It's an underfunded part of our health system. It's often a taboo subject, and people really don't want to talk about mental health conditions. In fact, recently there was an article I saw that insurance companies who offered life insurance are beginning to ask a question about a person's mental condition in a way that it wasn't asked before, and people who are admitting to just feeling stressed because of COVID-19, they're seeing their insurance premiums rise because of this. And now people have got to a place where, because it's in the media now, are scared to actually either get treatment for stress or to even tell their insurance company that they're feeling stressed because of a hike in insurance premiums. This is just indicative of our whole perspective in society of not wanting to deal with mental conditions. So when he talks about how does one deal with a relationship that's got to this problem, I've focused an awful amount on this one area in the studies that we've been doing recently, which is the issue of attachment. It's a field of psychology called attachment psychology or attachment theory, and I think it's in complete agreement with inspiration. It's the idea or the model, the concept that each of us, our primary foundational need is to be loved or to have affection or to feel needed. And I suspect the person who's asked this question, if they're speaking about themselves, that what's actually happened is there has been a parting of ways mentally, emotionally, between this person and their spouse, which is causing this problem of them not being able to communicate. And whilst it may seem that the reason for this is that the person may be gone off the movement or there's a problem with them, often this is a two-way issue, a two-way problem. And while I would never condone adultery, while I would not trivialize the sin of adultery, I would say for the majority of couples, if infidelity has occurred, if adultery has happened, often the driver or the foundational reason for this is that this person is not receiving or feeling loved in their relationship. And because we're all, I'll say it this way, I don't mean to say it in a vulgar fashion, because we're all pleasure seekers, they will seek for pleasure outside of marriage. I'm not saying that to condone it or to lessen the sin of adultery. And when I said pleasure, I mean it in a theological or doctrinal way, not in an emotional or passionate way. I'm not saying we just want some pleasure for a season. This is a drive that all of us have to feel loved, that we need to be loved. That's why we have such a drive to be married. And I have brought this up again, but I always want to repeat things 2 or 3 times so people really begin to get it. The reason why people are having so many problems in first finding a partner, and then when they are in a relationship, to maintain that relationship, the reason people struggle so much, there are a number of reasons. So I want to offer one important one, and that is the following. Society as a whole has broken down. Our family relationships, parents, siblings, cousins, uncles, we really don't have those relationships in the same way that society used to have it. We've moved away often because of work commitments. Some people have emigrated to different countries, and we don't have the same family and social ties that people used to have in former generations. If you're over 50, I'm sure if you recall back to your own childhood, you'll see that it was much more family orientated than things are today. And because so many of us have got these dysfunctional relationships with extended families, this drives us to a place where I'm going to use the word expect, we expect our spouse, this newly found person that's entered into our lives, to fill the role of all of those people that are no longer in your life. And it's a tall order to fill. And it's so tall an order, almost no one can fill that role, and therefore people feel that their relationship suffers or their spouse doesn't meet their needs. And the reality is, it's not that your spouse is not meeting your needs, it's just that you're asking too much of your spouse because you're not having your needs met by other close relationships, which more often than not would be parents and siblings, cousins, will be close family. Because most of us don't have close family to support us, we turn to our spouses and expect them to do far more than I would say that they're capable of doing. Just understanding that, I think, can help us to cope and deal with much of the stress and strain that we find ourselves in. Even though I've not given any strategies to actually work through those problems, just knowing that as a fact, I think, can be helpful. I think it's important to understand that, especially when people are courting and they find it so difficult. Often I think we expect too much from those people who we wanting to join together in faith with. Next question. How does one rekindle a friendship or marriage that has seemed to dwindle? So this is a follow-up question from the one that we've had before, and I'm going to say it's relatively simple, at least the theory is. You just have to love them. Loving someone is not that easy. It means constant giving, which is one problem, and the other problem is actually trying to understand how to love them, to understand their needs. Now, there are many self-help books, much self-help material that's available on the internet, and I'm not by any means recommending this one in, to say this is a really super great resource or this is the one that everybody needs, but it does have its uses, and I think is functional, and I think many of us have heard it. Perhaps some of you have tried it. It's called the 5 Love Languages by, I think, someone called Chapman, if I recall his surname. And what this person does, it's almost like if you're in the conference church, if you came from that system, people would do spiritual gift questionnaires to find out what your spiritual gifts are, what kind of person you are, so you could find a role in the church. All of these are psychologically based questionnaires which do serve a purpose, and this author has developed a questionnaire. It's available on the internet. He has many books on the subject, so you can go through this and you can discover what kind of a person you are, and also what kind of a person your spouse is, or your potential spouse. And you can do this with many relationships. You can do it with your children, you can do it with your siblings, you can do it with your work colleagues. It's not the be all and end all of relationships or understanding people, but it is helpful to get a broad brush understanding of how you tick, how you operate, and how they do. What undergirds this principle, this concept, this idea, which Chapman doesn't focus on particularly, is this idea that what really drives us, what really makes and motivates each of us, is this idea that each of us need to be loved. And I've spoken about this, as I say, extensively, that when we transition from childhood to youth to adulthood, human beings tend to get further and further away from one another, especially men. When they go from boys to teenagers to adulthood, they are trained through so many sources, some subtle, some overt, that basically tells them that, I don't know if you're familiar with the word wimp or weak, or all those kind of epitaphs that basically say it's a sign of weakness to expect to be loved or to show emotion, to even talk about the fact that you need physical help, or you need to be loved, or you need someone to just touch you or caress you or say something kind. Sorry, I tried to slow down. That was just for the translators. I've just taken a pause. So I think there are tools that are available to help us to be able to rekindle our friendship or our marriage, to rekindle that love. But it has to be built, I think, upon an understanding and acknowledgement that we never grow out of the desire or the need to be loved. What can confuse people or throw them is the idea that because a person is hard, I don't know if you can conceptualize this, we would say this person is really a tough person. They've got a hard heart, or they're hardened and they're unlovable. You may know someone like that. Your spouse may have those attributes. What I want to say to you is, if you are dealing with someone like that, not to believe it. It's not true that someone is hardened to the degree that they don't need human companionship and human love. Those people who say they prefer their own company, they prefer to be by themselves, have either a clinical mental condition, or they have been, is, for the vast majority of cases, the real issue is that they have been hurt or damaged sometimes in their life, and they are unsure of how to have a normal relationship. And that's the vast majority of people. They don't have a mental condition. There's not something wrong with them that they're unable to develop relationships with people. They don't have Asperger's or autism. They're just normal people who have been so hurt or damaged that they don't know how to express the fact that they need to be loved. And that should be your first assumption, that this person is normal, nothing wrong with them, and they just need to be loved, even if they seem unloving. There are self-help books that I've mentioned, but sometimes they only can go a certain way. Adventists have got two problems. One of them is that we tend not to want to spend money, and the other one is that we tend to be self-reliant. And both of those are problematic, because for many of us, professional counseling, professional help is something that is not only available, but I think is really, really useful. And I spoke about this last week as well, that there are people in the movement who can help, who do know how to assist and help people in relationship problems. But the issue is that even those people who have a knowledge of what to do tend not to have enough experience, because it's not a full-time job. They haven't been doing this for very long, compared to a professional counsellor who may have been doing it for 5-10 years, and they may have met hundreds of people who they have supported and helped. So they have a vast wealth of experience. You know, there aren't that many variations to the theme, and most of us are not as unique as we like to think. The Bible says there is nothing new under the sun. The Bible also says this temptation that has overcome you is a common problem. It's nothing unique. There are very few unique problems. Anything that you are confronting, you can be sure that there are people right now who are being confronted with the same issues and the same problems. So that's what I would recommend in how to rekindle a marriage if it seems to have dwindled. We need to recognize that both parties are at fault, something has gone wrong, and we need to rebuild, rekindle that relationship. And often you will need professional help, and if not professional help, perhaps help from someone in the movement who has some level of experience in counselling or helping people. Next question. What is the appropriate way to involve God in our relationships? I'm not sure what the questioner here is expecting in this answer. I mean, the obvious one is that we should involve God in all of our decision-making processes. We should have family worship together to involve God at that level. I think in any decision-making process, we should both spouses should be involving God in any decision that they make. Of course, one of the most important things in this area is actually reading inspiration together that deals with these kind of issues, so that God can be directly involved and assist you, not only through your prayer life but also your study life. Next question. What should a person, this is person A, do when they want to court another person, person B, but person B has never thought about person A in that way? So let me try to reframe the question as I understand it. Person A and person B know each other. I presume they have some relationship, probably a friendship. Person A is attracted to person B, but there's no indication that person B is attracted to person A. So the question is, what should person A do? I've dealt with how to start up relationships and my thoughts about what should happen before courtship begins, but I'll just quickly reiterate that. I think it's important for people to get to know one another, to be friends with one another at an early stage before they would enter into courtship, before they would enter into marriage. And often 12 to 18 months as friends, getting to know somebody, is a really good time frame before you would approach a person. So I'm assuming in this situation that that's what's happened. These two people know each other, they're friends, and person B has not thought about person A in a romantic way, but person A, I guess over time, begins to think this way. The question is, what should person A do? Ask the person out. I think they should go and approach the person and say, I like you. Now there's various ways of doing that. There's various ways of asking a person. You can go and ask the person directly. You can approach their parents. You can approach their friend. You can approach, I'll just call it an elder, but it could be someone spiritual in the church who's a mutual friend, hopefully, maybe not a mutual friend, but someone of reputation. You can go through a second party, basically, if you don't want to approach them directly. I think it depends on a number of things: where you live, how old you are, how long you've known the person. So I don't want to be overly prescriptive about how you actually do that initial move, but my advice would be, if you like somebody, go ahead and tell them. There are a couple of caveats to that. One, that you have known this person for some time, and the way this question is portrayed, this person is inferring that they do know the person for some time. So what I'm saying is, you don't just know somebody who you've seen on video or something. There's a teacher in Africa and you've seen them present a number of times, you like them, you never really met them, you don't know them, and you then would say, well, I like this person, but they don't really like me, I don't know them, and there's to ask them to enter into a courtship. I wouldn't recommend that that would be a good approach to take. Rather, I would suggest that you should get to know somebody first, and once you've known them for some time, and my advice tends to be 12 to 18 months, just as a friendship, then if you either began to like them because you never romantically because you never at first did, or you've continued to like them romantically and that feeling has strengthened, then you would approach them. So I don't think there's anything wrong to approach somebody, because you really don't know what they're thinking. Next question, related. How to approach the person you like? Should you do it directly, or first go to the elder? If so, will the elder tell the person? Do we still have to ask the parents first in the dispensation of equality? So I think you have all of those options, and I've mentioned them already. You can go and ask the person directly. You can go and first ask an elder what they think about it. Doesn't necessarily have to be an elder. It can be someone that you have confidence in spiritually. What would the elder do, or the person do? I guess it depends on the situation, but more likely than not, they will work on your behalf and approach the person, or they will tell you that you should approach the person. Either way, the person would be approached. I suspect more often than not, if the person you're speaking to thinks it's a good idea, they'll speak on your behalf. Do we still have to ask parents first? I see no reason why the fifth commandment and the way we've understood it before should be done away with, that is now null and void. Can't understand why that would be, why we wouldn't seek advice and counsel and even permission from parents. What I would say is, depending on a person's perspective, because some people will have already done this, both sets of parents would and should be asked, both the boys and the girls, and both of their responses, I'm saying, should be respected. So I see no problem in asking parents. I think it's a good idea to do that. If you like a person, ask them. They may say yes. Next question. Are we able to go to Bible workers for counsel if there are no elders? You can go to anybody. They don't have to have a position in the movement. They can just be a wise person, a mature sister, a young brother who has his head on straight. Anybody that you have confidence in. No problem asking Bible workers. We have a great amount of confidence in our Bible workers. Next question. Do people in leadership positions need approval of the elders of the person that they would like to court? So this is an interesting question. So I'll pick on Elder Tess because he's not here. So does Elder Tess need the permission of Elder Shaquetta before she would court somebody? I don't know what people think about that. I'm hoping from the way that you heard how I responded to the previous questions that this question has really already been answered, and it's really in the one word. I don't know if you picked it up here in this sentence. We could do William Miller's rules to try to understand what is the most important question, most important word in this question, and I would say it's approval. It's not elder. So I don't think the issue of elder is what's really important, or the leader, but it's approval. What does it mean to require or need approval. Does anybody actually need approval from anyone else to enter into a relationship, to marry? And I think the honest and frank answer is they don't need anybody's approval. They don't even need the parental approval. Everybody's free to do what they want. Now, if you don't seek for approval or you don't receive approval, I'm pretty sure that there are consequences for that. And I don't mean that in a really harsh or negative way, but there are consequences if you don't seek for approval. One of them is that you can get yourself into a big mess. If you were to ask someone, well, what do you think about this, and they would say, I don't think it's a good idea, and you go ahead, you can get yourself into trouble because you didn't follow wise counsel. But this idea that you need to have approval, I think is a false idea. And whilst I don't want to minimize seeking counsel from those in either a leadership position, or your parents, or someone wise, whoever it is, while I wouldn't want to minimize seeking advice, what I do want to say is that we don't actually need approval, in the sense that if someone were to ask me, I'm one of the leaders in the movement, and if a couple came up to me and said, we're interested in entering into courtship, I would say, well, I don't think it's a very good idea, and you don't have, if I were to say my blessing, you don't have my approval. What would happen if they went ahead anyway? Would they be disfellowshipped, reprimanded, punished in some way? The answer is not really. No, that wouldn't happen. All that would happen is that I think they would have a sense of regret by moving forward in a way that I think would cause them heartache. And in that situation, if I were them, I'd want to know why this approval is not being given, and if it's not given for a valid reason, to accept that and not to move forward. So whilst I think it's important to get approval, if that's the right way of saying it, I don't think it's mandatory or legal that it has to happen, that you can't marry without approval. Next question. How do we look for the right partner? Let me say it this way in a provocative fashion. Don't set your standards too high. Don't expect too much. Often our expectations are so high, we cannot find people who will meet those expectations. And so when you're looking, you'll say, you know what, there aren't any people suitable for me. So I think that's one of the problems. We've set our standards too high. And what I mean by that is on a number of levels. I'm not saying we shouldn't be careful, of course we should. But I've already alluded to this, that we expect too much from people nowadays. And the reason we expect too much is, I don't know if you're familiar with a Swiss Army knife. It's a little pocket knife that isn't just the blade, it's got all these little bits and pieces connected to it. It's multi-purpose. We expect our partners to fulfill too many roles for us that often they're not able or qualified to do. And it sets us up for a really difficult marriage. And so when the question asks what should we look for in the right person, don't look for too much. I think we expect too much. Secondly, we're driven by a culture, this is across the world, where physical beauty is a powerful driver for choosing somebody. And I think this can cause real problems in being able to find someone that's right for you. In fact, it wasn't so long ago, I get asked the question reasonably frequently, am I interested in entering into a relationship, entering into a marriage? and the question wasn't framed that way. I don't think they even let me answer the question, or they may have done, or it was the following question, and they said, "Oh, what's your type?" And I said, half jokingly, because everybody knows what that means, like, "What do you mean my type? Like, I prefer humans." And they said, "No, you know what I mean, your type, like blonde or brunette." And you can immediately see how crazy that is, because what about if I had liked or I thought about a Chinese woman? I don't think, I'm not saying it never happens, but genetically Chinese people aren't blonde. Or if I had said, well, I quite like a black sister, or a sister from Africa, or something like that, and I can't remember who the questioner was, where they're from, because I don't think they were I don't think it was a white person. I think it was a person of colour. I can't 100% remember. But it's just interesting that people have this idea when they talk about the right partner, what's your type, that people gravitate to this idea of, well, is it a blonde or brunette or something like that, or redhead? And the reason they do that is because we're driven in this society, in the world, by outward attraction. Now last week, or maybe the week before, I did say that we do need to pay special attention to our physical bodies, how we look. I think it's far more important than we give it credence as Christians, because we'll say, well, the most important thing actually is a person's character or their mind. And I just don't buy into that. I don't actually believe that it's true. I don't think we're built that way. I'm not saying that only beautiful people can marry. I am saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I am saying that a woman can find a range of men attractive, different heights, different builds, different complexions. They could find a number of partners. I think somewhere in these questions, if it's not already been asked, it tends to be asked, actually I think it may have been last week, is there a special person for me? And the answer is no. There is no one person out of these 7 billion that God ordained should be your special chosen one. I just don't believe that that's the case. I don't see any model for that. I don't see any wisdom in that, and I just don't think it's a correct approach to have. Time and chance, providence, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, indicates that you can meet someone. You might call it providence, I might call it a random encounter, and you could either hit it off or you may not. And if you're in a different place a year later or in a different time, you could be attracted to another person who is really completely different, many different attributes. So when we talk about the right partner, I don't think there is one right particular partner. I think we have to be careful that our expectations are not too high. I think you'd be careful of how we deal with someone's physical appearance, their body. I think it's more important than we admit to, but I don't think there is one right body type for any one person. We can all have our personal preferences, but even in those preferences, if we found somebody who we might think is not our personal preference, we could fall in love with them because a person is something, it's a being that is holistic. There's mind, spirit and body. And there's a lot of flexibility between those three. There's lots of variables. and you might think that you only like a certain body type or a certain skin tone or hair color, but if you meet someone who is absolutely stunning, just even mentally, who is a different skin color or hair color, you can be perfectly satisfied, happy with them. So looking for someone who's the right partner, obviously you find someone that you have a common interest. That's really important. I think that you should seek for things that you enjoy doing together, that you both be in the movement, etc. Your perspective of them should be right. You should consult widely with friends. That's how I think you should find the right partner. Often it takes time, which is why I really recommend that you get to know somebody for a good length of time before you venture out and propose to enter into a courtship. 12 to 18 months is a good time. If they live relatively close and you meet them in the flesh, it's important. Oh, I was speaking to somebody earlier today, and they mentioned to me a study that they had come across, which was about loneliness. And what this research had indicated to them was that when people are lonely, giving them a phone call often is not enough. What people need, if they are particularly lonely, is not just to hear the words or the voice, they also need to see the face. So often some kind of video interaction, video call, video messaging can really make a big difference. It's far better than just speaking. So the question is, in response to approaching the person that you like or you love, I'm just going to go with like. I'm not sure how much you can love a person before you even approach them. And my question is, does it mean that the person approaching should automatically feel that his or her request will be met? Is there room to say no to that request, based upon your own reasons, of course, that you can clearly explain to the next person, even if that person is simply, even if the reason is simply because you don't have the same feelings as him or her? I think the answer is yes. You do not have to say, of course I have to say yes to that person. You're quite within your rights to say no, and more than that, you don't even have to give a reason. Sometimes you may desire to give a reason, but there's no pressure for you to say why. And in fact, if you have asked somebody and you can tell that the answer is no, to put pressure upon them to find out why, I don't think is the right way to approach things. You should give the person the freedom and the space just to say no, and I don't think there should be any expectation to say, well, can you give me feedback of why you don't? This is not a performance review. The person is under no obligation to tell you why they don't want to move ahead, why they don't like you. And to put that kind of pressure on someone, I don't think is correct. So I would counsel people not to push why they have been spurned. I'm not saying they can't ask, because there may be whatever reasons given may help them to be able to understand better. They may be able to address that issue. But if the person is reticent to say, they don't have to say why. Next question. How do you respond to somebody who approaches you and you do not like them? How do you let them down politely? So I think I've answered that question. So whoever asked me this question on the spot, I already answered it. How do you respond to someone you approach, you don't like them? You just tell them, I don't like you, or I'm not interested, or depending on how polite you want to be, just say, I'm not ready to marry, I don't want to get into a relationship, I'm not there in my life. I think you have to be careful if you start giving what in the UK is called a politically correct answer, which means you don't give an honest answer. You can get yourself into trouble because a person who's pursuing you may not take that kind of a no for an answer, which I think is wrong for them to do, but they may have a forceful personality and may say, well, why? What's the problem? Instead of just taking no. So I think it's probably helpful if you can just say, no, I'm not interested. And if they say why, you don't have to say because you're ugly or because you don't smell nice or to be offensive. You can speak in a winsome, nice way, but try to be as honest as you can whilst not meaningfully hurting